Well, thank you again for coming. It's lovely to see such a big crowd and for fighting your way through the revelling halls on Broad Street, enacting what Robert Herrick, who I'm going to talk about, wonderful poet, described in his poem Corinna's Going a-Maying, about which I will say a little more later. He described it as the harmless folly of the time. I hope there's not too much folly in our presentations.
I'm not.
I'm keen to get into it. So I've got a few things out here on the table to show you, including two first editions, very rare, of Hesperides, Herrick's publication of poems, a careful gathering of the vast majority of his work, published in 1648. And here we have the frontispiece, quite often detached from the copies, and it says a lot about what is in his poetry and his whole approach. So Hesperides are nymphs who protect the classical garden of the West, associated with sunfall, often assisted by a dragon, but we don't have one in this instance. And here we have a very august bust of Herrick, looking remarkably younger than the 57 or 58 years he actually was. So a little bit of vanity there. And then we have Pussy, we have Pegasus associated with poetry, and a pedestal bearing a poem of praise in Latin to Herrick, and the idea that his verse will last, and that idea of immortality through verse runs through his collection. Interestingly, he was a vicar twice at Dean Prior in Devon. I haven't visited, I intend to, but there is nothing in this image that suggests the divine. He does have divine poems in the collection, but really what Herrick was about was sensuality, earthiness, a kind of joyous celebration of the carnal, of tradition, of the countryside. And it's all the more wonderful for that. We all know Marvell and we all know Donne, but few of us know a lot about Herrick. And Marvell and Donne are wonderful, but intellectual, puzzling, metaphysical. There's really not a lot of that in Herrick. So I really would encourage you to read him. Anyway, so moving quickly along, remembering not to be hoisted by my own timing rules. Here is another edition, and owned by Edmund Malone, the great collector, and the frontispiece, with all its suggestions of the paganic, the mythic, the sensual, has been ripped out, and a previous owner has written Most Wretched stuff, which tells you a bit about, I mean, Herrick had a reputation at the time for writing verse that could, it was often very sensual, sometimes it was teasingly sexual, and often addressing a number of women he wrote about, of whom Corinna was one. Another, perhaps more famously, was Julia. And if you don't have a lot of time, I would encourage you to read the Julia poems, which are absolutely just, well, they're wonderful. Moving on. Okay, Herrick really wrote very little towards the end of his life. He was interesting because he started in London. His father almost certainly committed suicide in Cheapside in London when he was age 1, and the whole idea of the search for a father runs throughout his poetry. He was a son of Ben Jonson. Ben Jonson was one of his fathers. The Divine Father was another, but the quest for the father he never knew runs throughout. It's very touching and quite mysterious at times. Anyway, he was in London, went to Devon during the Revolution. He lost his he lost his position, but then went back later. Anyway, his earliest verse, and these are his fairy poems, were published in this little volume. It's a sammelband. I think there are 12 books in here. At least half of them are unique, including the little pamphlet where Herrick's poems appear. This is not open at Herrick, but I thought I had to have it. It's a man who looks rather like the people we see reeling around on Broad Street. A green man bedecked with leaves. And of course, in Corinna is Going a-Maying, you see this amazing confluence between the city, where people have gone into the countryside and decked it out with the rural, and the countryside, which is full of city people. It's a lovely device in the poem. Anyway, there he is, looking very proud of himself. And just to finish, when Herrick's father died, he was looked after by his uncle, William. And very few of his letters survive. We have 14 of them. I think there is one other elsewhere. And you would love to think that they were all about creativity and his poetry and aspects of his life. They're begging letters. William looked after his inheritance, and he sent this from St. John's College, Cambridge. And he says to his father in a beautiful italic hand, "Sir, I know you understand me, and did you but know how disfurnished I came to Cambridge, without bedding, which I yet want, and other necessaries, you would, as I now trust you will, better your thoughts towards me, considering of my forecast expense, so the money you owe me." Okay, there's so much more to say about Herrick. I don't have time, but please do read his wonderful verse. And I'm just very, very pleased to have been able to introduce you to him on this day. His poem, Corinna's Going a-Maying, is perhaps his most famous, and it is pure Herrick. It's about trying to seize the day. It's a consciousness of what he called time's trans-shifting. And it's really a reversal of John Donne's The Sun Rising. John Donne is lying in bed with his lover, and he tells the sun to get lost. Let us lie for longer. Herrick is beseeching playfully, teasingly, sweetly, but urgently Corinna to get out of bed and enjoy the day, because you have to enjoy the day now, because it doesn't last forever. Love and life needs to be seized now. So that's where I'll end, and I will hand over to Mike, who's going to move us forwards.
Okay, thank you very much, Chris. I'm going to move first of all to the 19th century, and in the middle of the 19th century, the Victorian era into the early Edwardian era. The idea of May Day and its innocent pastoral romantic associations, Merry England, Good Queen Bess, it loomed very large, and there were lots of pageants and processions and so on celebrating May Queen. And of course, one of the most famous was Tennyson's poem, The May Queen, which starts off, you must wake and call me early, mother dear. And she goes on to say, for I'm to be Queen of the May, I'm to be Queen of the May. And this so struck a public chord when Tennyson came to get his degree, just over there across the road at the Sheldon, his honorary degree. As he walked down the aisle to pick up this great honour, somebody called from the gallery, did your mother call you early, Mr. Tennyson? And so May Day, I'll come back to that, but first of all I want to take a slight diversion to this man, Percy Manning. We called him the man who collected Oxfordshire, and if you want to know more after that, there's a wonderful book, not all by me. And he was a gentleman scholar, came to Oxford in 1888, died in 1917, and he was primarily interested in archaeology. But then he moved on to embrace not just material culture, but what we're now calling intangible cultural heritage, things like folklore and custom. And one of the things he did was to send out a helper he had called Thomas Carter. Can I bring this up, Chris? It's okay, gentlemen. And these are his little notes on tiny little pieces of paper. He was a self-taught, he's an autodidact, he was a quarry worker, but in working in the quarries, he learned much about paleontology and archaeology. And then Manning sent him on this quest to gather Oxfordshire folklore. And he found the Morris. He made these notes, things like, this is about Brides Norton Morris, held on Whit Tuesday. Last dance was done 26 years ago. 6 dancers dressed like Bampton. There's a list of names, who was the leader, who was the sword bearer, who played the music, and so on. And this material it's basically ethnographic gold dust. Nobody was doing this kind of work in the 19th century. And you can take all these names, you can look them up in the censuses, the birth records, in the court records when they transgress. And so what he was doing was, as an archaeologist, was capturing a dying tradition, because most of this activity had died out around the middle of the 19th century. And here's Percy at the end of the 19th century talking to old men about what they did in their youth. So one of the consequences of his work was, first of all, he published an article in the journal Folklore, the oldest folklore journal in the world, about seasonal customs and Morris dancing. And that led him in turn to find out that some of the older dancers from Headington Quarry, just up the hill, 2 miles up the hill, were still around, and he got them together to produce a kind of concert of living archaeology of Morris dancing. It was put on in what's now the old fire station down in George Street, and he got them together, he got them to practice without interfering with what he called the pure tradition. And the concert held on 13th of March 1899 was a great success. And that led to the fact that the Headington Quarry Morris dancers started dancing again. And 9 months later, on Boxing Day 1899, they met a guy called Cecil Sharp, who at that stage was a music teacher. But this is one of those sort of iconographic, pivotal moments. The Morris dancers meet Sharp, Sharp meets the Morris dancers. It's quite complicated really, but the upshot is Sharp becomes the leading researcher and scholar into folk music and folk dance at the beginning of the 20th century. And so there's a massive folk dance revival, and it does feed into the May Day ethos, because what Sharp successfully did was to present Morris dances in this kind of May Day context. And so it spoke to an unspoken need about, you know, what people wanted to think about May Day. So Sharp then founds the English Folk Dance Society and gathers around him some luminaries, mainly upper middle class people. Society burgeoned quite rapidly, and Sharp creates a demonstration team to demonstrate the best in English folk dance. And this is where my next object comes in. We were going to have it here, but it's really so delicate. I think we'll just have a picture instead. Elena, what you can see on the screen there is the innards of the butler saw machine. And it's 640 tiny photographs, about 1 inch by 3/4 of an inch, on a spool like that. And then can we have the picture of the viewer? What you do is you clip it on to that machine and you look at it through the hood and you turn the handle and you get an image of what's going on. And the Bodleian has one of these, and 46 years ago I borrowed that machine and I took the manuscript, the flick book it was called, and we produced a cine film. Can we go to the film, Elena? So this is what is on that What the Butler Saw machine. This is George Butterworth, the composer. He's demonstrating one of the more complex Morris dances. And George Butterworth was, I think he was probably destined to be Sharp's successor at the helm of the English folk dance movement. Sadly, though, he was killed during the First World War in 1916. But this is about 53 seconds of film, and as you see, he's quite athletic. he was a good dancer, he really was. And he once said, yeah, "I'm not a composer, I'm a dancer."
And they don't look like that on Broad Street.
No, they don't. However, I'm going to come on to that now, because as I say, this the folk dance revival was, thank you very much, Elaine, the folk dance revival was very much led by the upper middle classes, and the university then had a Morris dance team of its own, and they began to flourish. It's one of the earliest branches of the English Folk Dance Society in the just after the First World War. And the May Day ceremony, the Magdalen Tower, had been going on since the 15th century, but it only really took the form in which we see it today, or closely similar to that, around about the middle of the 19th. Before then, there's all sorts of things happened, and if you want to know about that, you can read an article by Roy Judge called May Day and Magdalen College, published in Folklore in 1986, and it really is a historical gem to read. Anyway, so the May Day ceremony was part of, it had been, brought within the scope of this general festivity of May Day and the idea of the innocents and the choir boys on top of the cathedral. So then, one of the leaders of the Morris men in the university, Theo Chaundy, whose bookshop was in fact just about where we're standing now, and also Percy Manning had apartments just about where we are standing now, in the shop above one of the shops in Broad Street. And anyway, Theo Chaundy leads the University Morris men, and in 1923 he says, "We are offering Morris dancing to the city as a free gift in grateful thanks for the survival of the ancient May Day ceremony here." So 1923, the first time we get Morris dancers on the streets. And then after the Second World War, they begin to invite other sides and other teams. And that's why you see outside what you see today. It is a festival of Morris dancing, and in all its now very diverse forms. But basically it continues to develop, and I think it will continue to develop. And folklore and tradition never stay still. So thank you very much for your time.